Hey guys, tonight we're stepping barefoot into the dense, whispering world of Truong, better known to many as the Annamite Mountains. Imagine standing there, under a vaulted green canopy, humidity so thick it clings to your eyelids, and the distant crackle of cicadas filling the air like static. The moss is squishy beneath your feet. Somewhere nearby a leaf moves, but you can't tell whether it's wind, lizard, or memory. You inhale, and the air smells like rain, gun oil, and fear. Welcome to you're gonna walk the whole thing. No, really. Tonight, step by step, you're traveling the length of this living labyrinth that stretched from North Vietnam all the way into Laos and Cambodia, a place soldiers called both home and hell. And trust me, you're not getting out of this one clean. You'll get bitten, you'll probably hallucinate once or twice, you might even wake up with a leaf growing out of your pocket. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from right now? What time is it there? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the first layers of jungle brush, where the trees thicken unnaturally fast. The Truong Mountains weren't meant for people, and they make it known. The roots are cruel, and the vines grow horizontal, like they're trying to trip you. Leaves slap your face. Somewhere above, a monkey laughs, but not kindly. And below you, mud. Not soft storybook mud, but gritty, industrial-strength glue that could eat a whole boot in seconds if you're not careful. In 1959, the North Vietnamese began pushing supplies and troops through this range using an informal series of footpaths that would evolve into the infamous Ho Chi Minh Trail. And while the name might suggest something organized and paved, the reality was much wetter. It wasn't one trail, but hundreds. A fractal web of tracks, streams, and caves stitched into a green wall so thick even satellites couldn't read it properly. And you're walking right into it. The mountains here were a perfect hiding place, too high, too misty, too complex to conquer. Historians still argue whether the U.S. ever truly understood the terrain's scale. From above, it looked manageable. From within, it was something else entirely. Something alive. Each bend in the path reveals another identical bend. Trees you swear you passed already start appearing again. Your brain begins to short-circuit from the repetition. Sleep-deprived American troops sometimes claim the forest could rearrange itself. Maybe it did. You hear water now, a stream or maybe a leech spa. As you crouch beside it, watching the brown current curl around rotting branches, you realize that this trickle was once used. No trucks, just floating warfare disguised as firewood. It's hard to imagine, but by the late 1960s, the Truong network could move thousands of troops, hundreds of tons of rice, and enough AK-47s to outfit a music festival. All this beneath the noses of the most heavily equipped army on Earth. And somehow, still, mud. And the bugs. Oh, the bugs. Vietnam's insects don't bother with subtlety. You've got centipedes longer than your hand, mosquitoes that could apply for passports, and fire ants that consider pain a gift they bring you, daily. North Vietnamese troops smeared their skin with a homemade salve brewed from garlic, kerosene, and crushed tree bark to keep the worst of them off. It didn't really work. But hey, it gave you something to smell other than your rotting socks. A fringe theory, mostly passed down from veterans and a few brave jungle guides, claims that some parts of the mountain hum, not from crickets or birds, but from the jungle itself, like a vibration buried too deep for microphones to catch. Scientists brush it off as wind and overlapping animal frequencies, but the locals insist. They call it the forest's throat. Probably both. You stop at a clearing, and someone scratched marks into the bark of a tree. Old Vietnamese script, barely legible. It could be directions, or a warning. Either way, you're reminded that this was more than just a war zone. It was a long-term habitat. Whole units lived out here for months. Some never left. there are fewer whispered stories about the forest taking them in willingly. Remember that mountain mist from earlier? It's not just for atmosphere. It was one of the North's best assets. Pilots called it ghost fog. It ate visibility. Planes flew in, weapons loaded, and often came back with nothing dropped, because they couldn't see a single target. Add that to the fact that many American bombers used black and white photos for targeting. Seriously. And you start to understand why Truong Son was basically nature's invisibility cloak. One real historical gem here. In 1967, American forces dropped sensors disguised as plants, yes, fake plants, to pick up foot traffic through the jungle. They were battery-powered and supposed to transmit audio whenever someone walked nearby. Problem was, monkeys were louder than soldiers, and rainstorms kept triggering them into paranoia. In the end, the jungle jammed more signals than it revealed. You keep walking. Another mile, another day. The forest smells like wet canvas and half-sweet rotting mango. Your canteen ran out hours ago, and you're rationing the last strip of dry rice paper like it's gold. A butterfly lands on your nose. You're too tired to laugh, too tired to swat. Somewhere up ahead, another leaf stirs, but again, you're not sure it's the wind. And so the Truong Son welcomes you, not with violence, but with the slow, soggy suffocation of time and memory. Here, you don't win battles. You haven't slept. Or maybe you have, for 10 minutes at a time, curled under a banana leaf, one eye open, one sock missing, and your back sore from the roots pretending to be a mattress. Either way, the sun's up now, casting silver spears through the canopy, and the jungle breathes steam like a laundromat. You move again, stepping onto something that might be a path, or might be where water ran downhill last night. That's the thing. The Ho Chi Minh Trail wasn't a trail. Not really. It was more like a hallucination shared by thousands of people and corrected only when they bumped into each other carrying ammunition. Back in Hanoi, they called it the Strategic Supply Route. In American military reports, it was the HCM Trail. But to those who used it daily, it was Dumantiksa, just the footpath. And it never sat still. The network sprawled over 16,000 kilometers at its peak. That's more than the distance between New York and Ho Chi Minh City. If you walked there, barefoot, uphill, in a rainstorm, carrying a box of grenades. The terrain didn't permit a highway, so the trail changed constantly. Workers, mostly volunteers, rerouted paths daily to avoid bombings. A stretch that existed on Monday might be a crater by Tuesday. That's why they built in redundancy. For every path, there were 10 others, overlapping like tangled shoelaces. If one got cut, the others absorbed the flow. There's an eerie genius to it. Bamboo bridges that could be rolled up and hidden in minutes. River crossings rebuilt after every airstrike, often by candlelight, sometimes waist-deep in leech soup. Soldiers nickname them ghost bridges. You're on one now, barely thick enough for a motorbike, and so slippery it feels like walking on a fish. Oh yeah, motorbikes. When trucks were too loud or too easy to spot, they used Soviet Minsks, modified with wooden mufflers and wrapped in cloth to muffle sound. Some were pushed instead of driven. Imagine pushing a 100-kilogram bike through the jungle in monsoon heat for hours. At that point, you're not in a war anymore. You're in a very aggressive gym commercial. Historians still argue whether the U.S. ever understood that the trail wasn't a thing to destroy, but a thing to outlast. You could bomb it all day, but by nightfall, a new one would be stitched from the ash. It was like trying to kill water with a hammer. In 1970 alone, the U.S. dropped over 1.5 million tons of bombs along the trail. That's more than all the bombs dropped in World War II's Pacific Theater. And still, it flowed. Every few kilometers, there were staging areas, makeshift stations where troops could rest, get water, or rebandage whatever part of their foot was. First Indochina War. That's right, colonial military education came full circle. Few of these engineers carried French compasses and slid old field manuals into plastic sheaths to survive the rain. The irony probably tasted better than the rice they were eating. You pass a sign now, just a wood plank tied to a tree with wire. The Vietnamese faded and the arrow nearly gone. Still, it's pointing somewhere. You follow. The mud here has a personality. It growls under your feet and clings with emotional attachment. By the time you emerge onto firmer soil, you're carrying half a field on your legs. The trees open up just slightly, and for the first time today, you see sky. A dull gray bowl. Nothing poetic, just overcast and exhausted. Like the jungle itself is sighing. You stop to rest on a log that might have once been part of a truck. Or a cow. You'll never know. And then you hear it, the low thrum of something ahead. It's not an engine. Not quite. It's a convoy. A real one. Well, maybe. Because some convoys weren't made of steel at all. Enter the world of decoy logistics. In sections of the trail, entire convoys were built out of bamboo, canvas, and hopes. Trucks carved from tree trunks. Tires made from painted leaves. Even exhaust smoke crafted using small fires in strategically placed pipes. The purpose wasn't to deliver supplies, but to die convincingly. Bombers would waste entire payloads on these fakes while the real trucks slid through the trees nearby. Of course, not everything was fake. You hear footsteps too, many of them. Columns of soldiers moved in silence, spread out in staggered formation. No talking, no singing, just the steady squish of footfalls and the occasional cough swallowed by foliage. Everyone carried more than they could afford to. Guns, rice, letters from home, the weight of doubt. If you fell behind, you were left behind. Not because your comrades didn't care, but because they couldn't stop. The jungle punished hesitation, and mosquitoes don't wait. Every few miles, the trail changed character. In Laos, it became dustier. In Cambodia, more open. In central Vietnam, it turned cruel. Some areas were so soaked that even helicopters couldn't hover. The trees clawed at blades, the clouds swallowed engines. And the trail? It simply curved around the destruction. One bizarre truth. Pigeons were still used here. Not as pets or symbols of peace, but as reliable couriers. When radios failed and batteries corroded from the damp, homing pigeons offered the closest thing to a secure messaging app. Their success rate? Higher than many U.S. transmissions interrupted by weather, bugs, or that one squirrel who chewed through the wrong cable. You listening? Something's ahead. Not danger, just another rest post. You'll stop here. The man beside you, face streaked with soot, offers a piece of candied ginger. You chew it slowly, not because you enjoy it, but because your jaw doesn't know how to move fast anymore. The trail continues, endlessly. Your back aches. You swear your knees have learned sarcasm. And still, the trail calls you forward like a story halfway through that you just can't put down. But you're not flipping pages, you're flipping leeches off your boots. Up ahead, there's a shallow ravine crisscrossed with fallen logs. You balance across one, arms out, shoes squelching, and then it hits you how the simplest things kept people alive out here. Not fancy gear, not shiny guns. No, survival came down to the humble, the handmade, and the occasionally ridiculous. Like rubber sandals. They called them Depro, beard sandals, because the cut-up tire treads had stringy rubber bits that flared out like whiskers. Invented out of necessity, crafted from old truck tires, they were cheap, nearly indestructible, and eerily good at gripping slippery terrain. Soldiers often cut them to fit their own feet, custom style, and unlike boots, they didn't rot or stink quite as fast, mostly. The North Vietnamese army swore by them. They let your feet breathe. They left misleading footprints, backwards, sideways, anything to fool trackers. Some even claim they left false prints just to confuse enemy scouts. Historians still argue whether that worked. But one thing's for sure, no one forgot the sound of Depro flapping in the mud. You crouch beneath a tree, peeling a strip of tree bark to chew, not for nutrition, but just to keep your jaw busy. Because hunger wasn't a clock, it was a background hum. To fight it, troops carried strange little kits, a rice ball wrapped in banana leaf, a pinch of salt, a cube of fermented tofu, and in some cases tiny squares of pressed fish jerky so dry it could double as cardboard. But more impressive than what they ate was how they navigated. Welcome to the world of silk maps. See, paper maps? Useless out here. The rain shredded them. So the Vietnamese and some foreign allies developed maps printed on silk or nylon, lightweight, water-resistant, foldable into a shirt pocket. You could sleep on one. You could even wash it with your socks. Some were hand-painted, others printed using old-school screen techniques, then lacquered with plant resin to last longer. A fringe tidbit buried in old logistics reports, there were even maps printed with invisible ink, activated only by heat or moisture. Did they work? Maybe. Or maybe someone in an underground bunker was having too much James Bond fun. The path veers again into a tunnel of vines so thick they practically form a roof. It's darker here, cooler. You welcome the shade, but not the scent. Something died nearby, or is dying slowly. The jungle doesn't ask permission. You reach into your bag, pulling out a chunk of dark, waxy resin, bakhung or jungle incense, used not for prayer but for camouflage. Its smoke masked the scent of humans, confused dogs, and allegedly made mosquitoes less interested in your bloodstream. Soldiers carried bits of it in tins next to waterproof matches and tiny knives sharpened on rocks. And when it came to shaving, well, you didn't. Beards became part of the gear. As you step forward, you stumble slightly on something under the dirt. You brush it off. It's a spoon, just a spoon. Bent, rusted, half swallowed by a root. But it tells you someone once paused here, maybe shared a meal, maybe didn't finish it, maybe didn't finish the day. Objects like this are everywhere, like quiet ghosts. Jungle archaeologists today still find canteens, coins, even handwritten notes sealed inside film canisters. One such find in 2012 included a set of Chinese-made playing cards, wrapped in oilcloth with one card missing, the Ace of Spades. That specific card, by the way, was used by American forces as a psychological weapon, left on bodies or in villages to frighten enemies. But here it seems the owner simply lost it during a rainstorm. Maybe in a card game that ended with a joke or a mortar. You keep walking. A clearing opens up, a rare thing. In the center sits a rotting crate, its markings faded. You pry the lid with a stick. Inside, tubes of anti-leech ointment. Several so rusted they become jungle art. These were issued like candy back then, slathered on ankles, arms, anywhere the little bloodsuckers could sneak in. Whether they actually worked, well, results varied. The forest here begins to hum again, not loudly, but insistently. A mix of insect wings, wind-blown leaves, and maybe a radio signal, bouncing between tree trunks. Because yes, radios were a thing here. Clunky, Soviet-made, battery-hungry monsters that weighed as much as a loaf of bricks and worked best if you stood on one leg and prayed to the nearest thundercloud. But even those were more reliable than runners in certain conditions. During one operation, a unit spent 3 days trying to send a message through muddy terrain, only to be beaten by a boy with a note sewn into his sleeve. Human couriers, often teenagers, became the real carriers of critical intelligence. They didn't beep, they didn't jam, they just ran. And now, it's raining again. Not pouring, just that quiet drizzle that soaks you before you realize it's happening. You tighten your poncho. The rain makes everything louder and quieter at once. You can't hear yourself think, but you also can't hear what's creeping up behind you. It's not paranoia, it's experience. Every soldier in this jungle slept with one ear open, one boot half on, and a knife within reach. The trees didn't just block light, they blocked certainty. American units sometimes dropped motion sensors shaped like bird droppings trying to catch footfalls. But the jungle adapted faster. Locals learned where they were and buried them under wet leaves or fed them to pigs. Take your pick. You stop. Ahead, carved into a rock face, someone's scratched coordinates, latitude, longitude, and a date. 1968, that year, the Tet Offensive. The trail would have been a highway of chaos, and yet, you sit beside it now, your sandals, rubber or otherwise, are soaked. Your maps, if they were silk, are folded in your heart. You chew a sliver of dried ginger and close your eyes. The trail impossibly continues, and you impossibly follow. Your feet are beginning to forget what dry feels like. Each step through the underbrush is a soft squelch, as if the earth is trying to keep a piece of you with it. And honestly, it might. The Truong Sun jungle doesn't just cover ground, it devours it. Welcome to the part of the journey where even time begins to rot. Here, in the deepest parts of the trail, you find yourself walking over strange shapes. Not logs, not stones, not quite bones either. You look down and spot the rusted corner of a metal panel, half swallowed by ferns. Just barely, you can make out the faded logo of a Soviet truck. Gaz-69 maybe. But where's the rest? Gone. The jungle ate it. In this place, the forest is faster than memory. Within weeks, finds reclaim wreckage. Within months, entire encampments vanish. A boot dropped in April might be invisible by June. Tents become leaf mulch. Helmets sprout mushrooms. And if no one speaks your name, well, you might disappear too. It's not poetic, it's just logistics. Historians still argue whether the speed of this decay was fully understood by either side. American satellite photos would show solid roads one day, only for the next batch to reveal nothing but green, no signs of damage, just nothing. As if the jungle had pressed Ctrl+Z on the whole region. But you're not just looking at the surface. Some of the greatest mysteries of the Truong Sun lie beneath your feet. Step off the path and dig a few inches. You might uncover a cache of hidden weapons sealed in waxed canvas, or an old rice jar wrapped in tar-soaked rope, or a full AK-47 disassembled and tucked into a bamboo case. These weren't buried randomly. These were part of a calculated system, temporary depots known only to select soldiers. Lose the map, and the cache became part of the soil forever. There's a story, half-whispered, half-documented, about a series of crates buried near the Laos border in 1973, never recovered. They contained French pistols, foreign currency, and a journal filled with weirdly detailed botanical drawings. Was it a hidden supply for an assassination unit, a stash for a deserter who never returned? Or just someone's nervous breakdown turned into art? You pass a patch of ground that smells slightly of rust and fuel. Dig there, and you'll probably find a motorbike frame now more moss than metal. The Ho Chi Minh Trail is a graveyard without gravestones, a mechanical compost heap that grows its own camouflage. And not everything here was lost by accident. Some units deliberately left behind false gear, broken radios, empty crates, even fake maps, to confuse any enemy that might follow. You might be tracing a trail not of footsteps, but of breadcrumbs no one ever meant to lead anywhere. You duck under a branch slick with moss. Your shoulder brushes a vine that feels too much like a snake. You apologize to it anyway, just in case. Up ahead, there's the skeletal remains of a truck, not entirely gone, just mostly. But someone's painted a phrase on the side in white, half flaked off. Mula bantoy. Rain is my friend. You nod. It's not wrong. During monsoon season, it rains so hard that entire trail sections became invisible rivers. Supply teams would lash crates to trees so they wouldn't float away. Soldiers rigged up makeshift roofs from ponchos and banana leaves, crouching under them like sad origami frogs trying to eat soup without watering it further. And all the while, the jungle just thickened. There's a fringe story from 1971, buried in a South Vietnamese journal, about a forward unit that returned to an old staging site, only to find it completely overgrown, in less than 3 months. Tents gone, paths erased, even the fire pit vanished beneath roots and vines. The jungle had reclaimed it so completely that one soldier reportedly burst into tears, not from fear, from awe. You take a detour now, curiosity pulling you leftward. You climb a slight rise, breath slowing. At the top, you find what looks like an old shelter. Roof caved in, but the frame still standing. A pair of boots sits just inside, side by side, facing the door. There's something intimate about that. As if their owner just stepped out, or maybe never got the chance. Inside, you find a mirror, surprisingly intact. The glass is fogged, the frame warped from moisture. But you look into it anyway, and for a moment, you see yourself, but also someone else. Someone thinner, soaked, wrapped in a mosquito net, and cradling a tin bowl of rice. Just for a moment, you back out quietly, let the mirror keep its secrets. The trail slopes downward again. The mud here smells like clay and old war stories. You slip once, then twice. A root catches you before gravity can embarrass you completely. But it's clear this part hasn't been walked in a while, which means you're either lucky or exactly where you shouldn't be. Birdsong returns, faint, melancholy, as if the forest is telling you a story it once forgot. You sit on a fallen log to rest. Nearby, a tree has grown right through the center of a rusted helmet. It didn't push the helmet away. It swallowed it, absorbed it like calcium. That helmet belonged to someone, and now it belongs to the mountain. You exhale. The air is heavier here, not because of humidity, but memory. You can feel the weight of all that's gone. The jungle is not cruel, just efficient. It keeps what it needs, and everything else, it returns to root. You pull out a plastic-wrapped ration bar from your pack, something vaguely banana-flavored and disturbingly chewy. As you eat, you think about how many people did this same thing, in this same place, decades ago. Some survived, some didn't. All of them forgotten by the trail the moment they stepped off it. By now, you don't even flinch at the low-hanging vines. You've swatted a dozen too many, most of which turned out to be vines and not snakes. Probably. Your boots feel like wet paper bags. But it's the sounds that really get to you. Because out here, silence is rare. And even worse than silence is a song. Somewhere up ahead, just faint enough to question your sanity, you hear music. Not birdsong, not humming, but actual music. Like a melody wrapped in static. Maybe a woman's voice, maybe just wind through broken bamboo. Whatever it is, it makes your neck tighten like a bad haircut. You creep forward, staying low beneath a sweep of ferns, and there, tied to a tree and camouflaged with leaves, is a small field radio. Its battery pack half buried in mud, its antenna bent like a wilted daisy. A faded wire runs off into the trees, God knows where. And yes, there's music leaking from it. Soft, melancholic, Vietnamese folk tune maybe. Or propaganda. Or both. This was the jungle's real network, a web of radio posts, coded broadcasts, and whispered transmissions, designed to move information through a landscape that hated noise. Most of the time, these radios didn't carry full conversations, just pulses, Morse beeps, and, weirdly often, songs. See, songs were safer. You could hide a dozen meanings in the rhythm. Verses could be triggers, coordinates, or even warnings. When the third chorus plays, don't cross the river. If the harmony drops out, airstrike incoming. Brilliant, low-tech, infuriating to anyone trying to decipher it. Historians still argue whether these radio songs were ever truly cracked by U.S. intelligence. Some say yes, eventually. Others claim the codes were changed so often, or sung so imperfectly, that computers gave up. One NSA report allegedly labeled the transmissions as too human to predict, which, depending on your mood, is either frustrating or beautiful. You sit beside the little radio, letting the tune wash over you. There's something sleepy about it, like a lullaby sung by someone too tired to finish the words. You think of the operator who last touched this. Did they make it out? Did they fall asleep listening to their own transmission? Of course, not all the jungle whispers came through machines. There were human messengers too. Small, fast, often teenagers, trained to memorize long strings of numbers or poems that, when decoded, became orders. They didn't carry papers, just memory. If captured, they were told to forget. If that failed, well, sometimes forgetting wasn't a choice. One fringe tale, passed around in hushed veteran circles, and the ground rises slightly. Up ahead, there's a narrow ditch, barely noticeable, until you realize it's part of a listening trench. A shallow slit, just deep enough to lie in, hidden under branches. Here, soldiers would wait for footsteps, sometimes for hours, sometimes days. No movement, no talking, just ears tuned to the vibrations of approaching boots. Some trenches were even lined with dried bamboo husks, which crunched distinctively when stepped on. Nature's landmine alarm. You walk carefully now. Too many stories of scouts stepping in the wrong place and vanishing into the underbrush. No noise, no trace. The jungle wasn't just a setting, it was a participant, a collaborator, or a trickster. You reach another small clearing. In the center, a makeshift antenna, cobbled together from scavenged wire, bamboo, and part of a frying pan. Seriously, you admire the craftsmanship. You also silently hope it's not still wired to anything live. These jungle rigs were patched together with spit, sweat, and blind optimism. Some used copper from stolen telephone lines. Others relied on batteries made from salt, charcoal, and aluminum scrap. If it buzzed, it worked. If it smoked, it still worked. If it exploded, well, then you'd call it experimental. A light rain starts again, and with it, the return of sound. Because here's the thing, the jungle is never quiet. There are always layers. Crickets arguing, leaves falling, frogs swearing at each other in amphibian rage. And beneath it all, the human noise, breaths, whispers, codes. There's a known tactic from the trail days called ghost playback. North Vietnamese troops would use tape recorders. Yes, real, heavy, clunky ones. To play back sounds of gunfire, shouting, or marching. But not to scare people, to mask real movement. If the Americans heard marching footsteps, they might think, oh, it's a trick, when it wasn't, or they'd hear silence. And assume it was safe, when it wasn't. Imagine lugging a Soviet-made reel-to-reel recorder through the jungle. Some weighed as much as a dog, but soldiers did it. Because sound, in this war, was strategy. You duck under a vine and feel a faint tremor through the ground. Not from footsteps. Probably thunder. Probably. You pass another signal post, a code station, judging by the notched bamboo hanging like wind chimes. Each piece carved with numbers, strung in a way that looked like art, but functioned like a keypad. Messages could be left here, disguised as decorations. A tap on the third bamboo, followed by 2 left-hand knots. Go east. Or, we're low on rice. Or, they're watching. Historians still can't agree how widespread this method was. Some walked far enough that the jungle for once let the melody go. You pause, letting the soft gray light of evening soak into your skin. You're wet, you're hungry, and you're carrying at least 2 pounds of extra water in your sleeves. But you're also strangely calm, because out here, beneath the canopy, where every branch might be a message and every breeze a warning, you've started to understand something. The jungle doesn't speak in words. It speaks in whispers. Rain again. You can't tell if it ever really stops or if it just pauses between moods. Now it falls in a polite drizzle, the kind that seeps into your bones without announcing itself. The jungle smells clean in a way that makes you suspicious. Because in the Truong Son, nothing is ever just what it seems. Not even dinner. Your stomach growls, loudly. The kind of growl that makes birds scatter. Which is ironic, because if you want to eat tonight, one of those birds might need to become dinner. Welcome to the Truong Son buffet. Muddy, unpredictable, and sometimes still twitching. The main course most days? Rice. Always rice. Sticky, plain, and packed into banana leaves like edible origami. But out here, rice didn't travel alone. It was supported by a rogues gallery of local protein, mystery vegetation, and wartime improvisation. One staple was kom nam, or compressed rice balls. Rolled tight to fit into pockets, wrapped in layers of leaf and fabric, they were the trail's version of an energy bar. Soldiers would take a bite every couple hours, less out of hunger, more out of duty. Chew, swallow, keep walking. The real art, though, was in the foraged supplements. Jungle rats, frogs, crickets, even the occasional monkey, if it was a particularly desperate day. Squirrels were roasted on sticks. Insects were flash-fried in whatever oil you had, sometimes motor oil if you were reckless or unlucky. Snails? Abundant, slippery, regrettably chewy. A fringe favorite? Banana trunk soup. Yes, the inside of banana tree trunks can be sliced into rings, boiled with salt, and passed off as something vaguely resembling food. It's fibrous, bland, and entirely edible, if you pretend hard enough. Historians still argue whether these meals were nutritionally sustainable or just edible acts of willpower. Most agree that starvation never came from lack of resourcefulness. It came from exhaustion. You could catch a fish. But could you build a fire after hiking 18 kilometers in wet socks and leech-infested pants? That was the real question. You crouch now near a blackened fire pit, long cold. There are scraps of charred bamboo, a few rice husks, and the unmistakable smell of fermented fish paste. Mom name. It's pungent, like if soy sauce had an existential crisis in the jungle, but it packed calories and salt, and it turned bland rice into something vaguely emotional. Tucked into a crevice nearby, you find something strange, a tiny spice jar, sealed with cloth and string. Inside is a pinch of dried chili, still red, still fierce. It belonged to someone who carried flavor as part of their gear. Maybe they were a cook, or maybe they were just tired of boiled moss. You think, leaving a visible trail. You bite into a ration bar from your pack. It tastes like old chalk in ambition. You chew anyway. Nearby, a tree shakes, and out drops a bird trap, cleverly disguised as part of the undergrowth. It's a simple snare, made with bamboo twine and tension sticks. You inspect it, wondering how many of these are still hidden out here, silently waiting for prey that will never come. The trail doesn't forget how to trap. It just waits. You continue, slipping slightly on a mossy incline until you reach a narrow creek. Someone's built a crude filtration system, bamboo tubes layered with charcoal, sand, and cloth. Still intact, still dripping. Probably not safe anymore, but a marvel of ingenuity. During peak usage of the trail, systems like these replaced every few kilometers. Water was never guaranteed to be clean, but this was better than nothing. And the metal taste? Well, that was just part of the vintage. A fringe legend whispers of a man named Bao, a field cook who carried not a weapon, but a giant wok on his back. His meals were said to improve morale so dramatically that squads would take detours just to reach his rice station. One diary entry describes fried eel so crispy it could deflect bullets, almost certainly exaggerated. But then again, the jungle breeds exaggeration like mold. You pause to rest against a wide tree trunk and find it carved with several notches and markings. Not coordinates, not warnings, but menus. Faint, scratched-in drawings of rice bowls, fish, even a lopsided chicken leg. Graffiti from a hungry soldier or a joke? Either way, it makes you smile. Even now, someone thought about food enough to etch it into the bark. That's dedication. Or hunger. Up ahead, the path widens just slightly, and you see signs of a former ration drop zone. Broken crates, rusted tin cans, and a tangle of parachute fabric snagged high in the trees, fluttering like a forgotten flag. These were aerial drops, used during desperate stretches when terrain or bombings blocked ground transport. But drops came with risk. If the chute got caught or drifted, it could land in enemy hands, or worse, in the river, where everything got wet and instantly inedible. Stories persist of troops drying rice over low flames for 3 days just to salvage one shipment. Talk about commitment to the carbs. You continue, stepping around another rotted box, half covered in lichen. Inside, a rusted spoon and a single tea brick, compressed leaves shaped into a disc. Tea was rare, precious, often traded like currency between units. A warm cup could mean warmth, caffeine, and sanity all at once. You pocket the spoon for no good reason other than it feels like you should. Because food here wasn't just survival, it was ritual. Boil water, soften rice, share the salt, stir with the same stick someone else used last week. And just as you're thinking that, the rain pauses. You take a deep breath and smell not smoke, not rot, but lemongrass. Faint, fleeting, maybe just a memory, but it reminds you, even in this wet maze of hardship and hunger, someone once stopped long enough to plant a herb, and someone somewhere made soup. You follow the scent of memory now, lemongrass, ginger, maybe even the ghost of roasted peanut oil, though that last one might just be wishful thinking. The jungle has a way of teasing your senses, mixing the real with the imagined. But as the path twists again and the soil begins to dry under your feet, you realize something else is changing too. The terrain beneath your boots is no longer natural. You're walking on gravel, not much, just enough to notice. Pebbles, maybe crushed limestone. A small miracle in a place ruled by mud. This patch is smoother, subtly elevated, like it wants you to notice it. Because what you've stepped onto now is one of the Ho Chi Minh Trail's most extraordinary hidden layers. The paved stretches. Yes, paved, not with asphalt, not in the highway sense, but with compacted earth, gravel, even bits of crushed rock carried in by hand or ox cart, smoothed by generations of footsteps and reinforced with layers of tree resin and, occasionally, bricks salvaged from colonial ruins. Over time, these roads became eerily resilient, quiet, strong, nearly invisible from the air. Historians still debate whether American aerial surveillance truly understood how advanced some of these jungle highways became. Declassified photos show narrow ribbons of light brown winding through the green, but often dismiss them as animal tracks or dry stream beds. Meanwhile, bicycles were rolling over them carrying 200 kilograms of supplies each. Let that sink in. Ah yes, the bicycles. You stop at a clearing where a rusted frame leans against a termite-bitten stump. Not a child's bike, a cargo bicycle, rigged for war. The kind modified so heavily that it stopped being a bike and became a portable ox. Bamboo reinforcement across the frame, panniers made from rice sacks and old tires, the seat removed, the handlebars wrapped in rope. These weren't ridden, they were pushed, pulled, worshipped, cursed. You grab the handlebars now gently, they're cracked and slick. You imagine the sound of 1,000 boots crunching gravel as soldiers, barefoot or sandal-clad, drag these bikes up impossible slopes, over bridges, and through minefields. At peak use, it's estimated that over 20,000 bicycles moved along the trail. Some were so overloaded they had to be held upright with wooden crutches tied to their sides. Others had wheels so warped they resembled lazy eggs, but they moved, and that was enough. A quirky side note buried in a Vietnamese field manual from 1969. Some bike handlers gave their bicycles names, just like pets or girlfriends. Hoa, Sum, Little Thunder. It wasn't sentimentality, it was survival. You name something, you care if it lives, if it breaks, if it gets left behind. And the bikes did break, constantly. Tire treads worn down to the canvas, spokes popped, chains rusted. But out here, there were no mechanics. so soldiers carried toolkits wrapped in oilcloth, spare inner tubes, a hammer carved from hardwood, even hand-forged metal spoons used to pry open gears. Improvisation wasn't just encouraged, it was doctrine. You reach a fork in the trail. One path continues flat, the other veers steeply uphill toward what looks like a wide ridge. You take the incline, legs screaming. And at the top, you're rewarded. A lookout point, one of the few that hasn't collapsed. You step out onto the platform, just 3 logs tied into a wide Y shape with vine rope, and peer out. The view is dizzying. Jungle canopy to every horizon, mist curling like steam over hills. And below, you can just barely make out the weaving gray of the trail. It doesn't go straight. It zigzags, loops, folds back on itself like a stitched scar. That's not bad design. That's camouflage. Back during the war, some lookout posts like this had rangefinders or battered field binoculars stolen from the French. Others relied on human eyes and practiced patience. Scouts could watch convoys for hours, counting crates, noting troop movements, or confirming whether smoke plumes were cooking fires or something more fatal. You rest your elbows on the wooden rail and let your breath catch up. Below, there's movement, just leaves in the wind. But the same view 50 years ago might have shown you a column of shadowed figures, all moving in unison, all pushing bikes, all pretending they were invisible. A fringe tidbit pulled from a captured diary. One soldier described using tree frogs as early warning systems. He claimed that certain species would stop croaking just before strangers approached. Whether it was myth or jungle wisdom, well, you're listening now. And the frogs? They're silent. You descend the ridge and find a wide patch of cleared ground. A few broken crates, rotted boots, and half a metal drum remain. You've stumbled upon a former maintenance station, one of the many sprinkled along the trail. These weren't just places to rest. They were bike hospitals. Here, damaged bikes were triaged, repaired, refitted. Spare parts were scavenged from abandoned frames. If nothing else worked, 2 broken bikes were welded into one barely working Frankenstein contraption. Rubber was melted over open flames, pressed into tire molds cut from wood. Everything was a resource. Nothing was trash. You find the charred remains of an old bicycle brake cable, coiled like a dead snake, still surprisingly strong. You pocket it. No reason. It just feels earned. The sun dips lower, throwing the jungle into that strange in-between light, where every shadow seems too long and too curious. You walk on, thinking about the thousands of bikes that passed this very spot. Some in your palms. The jungle doesn't need monuments. It has bicycles buried in silence. The trail is narrowed again. The mud returns, with that quiet squish underfoot, like you're walking on soaked bread. Your calves burn from the last ridge climb, but there's no rest here. Not when the jungle decides you're the one who keeps moving. You duck beneath a curtain of hanging vines, and suddenly you're in a pocket of deep, unnatural quiet. No birds, no frogs, just the buzz of your own ears and the steady thump of your heartbeat, which, naturally, means you're close to something hidden. Sure enough, you spot it. Just beyond a line of thin trees, almost completely consumed by moss and fern, is what looks like the entrance to a narrow trench. It dips into the ground at an angle, braced with rotting bamboo, and blocked by a few camouflaging branches. You clear it carefully and descend. Welcome to the underground world of the trail. You've read about this, heard whispers, but seeing it for yourself is different. The tunnels aren't the polished kind you've seen in Coochie tourist brochures. These are rough, damp, sliced into the hillsides by shovels, hands, and sheer desperation. Inside, it's cool. Smells like old earth and moldy canvas. You flick on your headlamp, and there it is, a rest station, or what's left of it. Hollowed-out chamber, collapsing bamboo bunk frames, a moldy mess kit left behind like someone just went for a drink and never came back. The tunnels were a necessity, not a luxury. Bombing raids made the surface unsafe, especially during daytime, so troops lived underground, sometimes for days, even weeks. They cooked, slept, stitched their wounds, and whispered orders, all while buried under 6 feet of hostile earth. Fringe detail? Some of these chambers were soundproofed. Mud packed between bamboo slats. Walls layered with palm bark to muffle voices. One particularly inventive group even glued bat guano into the gaps. Gross? Yes. Effective? Also yes. Historians still argue whether some of the deeper systems, multi-level, booby-trapped, maze-like, were ever mapped in full. Most likely, not. You didn't draw maps of tunnels. You remembered them with your feet. If you forgot, you didn't come back. You duck into another chamber. The ceiling here is so low you have to crouch. There's an old supply register carved into a plank, just hash marks and dates. April, May. Then, nothing. You run your hand across it, careful not to knock loose any memories that might still be sleeping here. And then, you hear something. A drip. Slow. Repetitive. It echoes, somewhere down the side passage. You shine your light and follow, and you find a tiny room at the end, a jungle infirmary. There's a rusted IV pole, bent at the top. A tattered curtain separates this space from the corridor. You brush it aside and find something utterly ordinary and completely haunting. A wooden comb, still whole, still clean. You sit down on the bamboo bunk beside it. This space held suffering, screams, sleep, survival. Out here, doctors weren't just rare, they were miracles. Most medical officers were barely trained. Supplies were limited to boiled water, tree resin, and hope. And yet the patients kept coming, carried in on hammocks, on shoulders, on the backs of bicycles, if that's what it took. One story, unconfirmed but persistent, tells of a nurse named Schwan who performed surgeries using a sharpened spoon, sterilized over a candle, removed shrapnel from 6 soldiers in one night. No lights, no morphine, just whispered prayers and hands that didn't tremble until morning. You leave the infirmary with a lump in your throat and reemerge from the tunnel, blinking into daylight that now feels almost offensive. The jungle hits you in the face with heat and dampness like an annoyed cat. You're back on the trail, above ground. But part of you is still down there, under the roots. You walk again, your pace slower now, more respectful. The path here is edged with camouflage netting, tangled into the trees, faded, tattered, but it once concealed so much. Beneath this stretch of trail, entire weapons depots were hidden, ammunition boxes stacked in soil-padded vaults, disassembled mortars, even Russian-made rocket shells, all packed with enough care to survive tropical rot and American sensors. The depots were constantly moved, like secret islands drifting beneath the jungle. They were built at night, mapped only in someone's memory. If a site was compromised, it was burned, flooded, or in one chilling case, booby-trapped with hornet nests. Yes, hornets. Because why waste explosives when nature's own little nightmares were already loaded and angry? You reach a grove of unusually straight trees. There's a clearing in the middle, and in it, the remains of a bamboo signal tower, maybe 3 meters tall in its prime. These towers weren't for defense. They were for observation and relay. A scout would climb up, spot enemy movements, and whistle down coded signals, one long, two short, depending on direction and urgency. Sometimes signal flags were used instead: red for movement, yellow for supply, black for don't ask. If you were lucky, the jungle breeze didn't mess with your message. If you weren't, well, let's just say communication breakdowns in the forest had high-stakes outcomes. The wind kicks up slightly, rustling the leaves above you like soft applause. You realize how many eyes must have watched from these trees, hidden, patient, tired. The jungle was never empty. It was always observing. And that thought follows you as the path begins to slope again, gently curving downhill toward what looks like the remains of an old street. You step carefully onto the rotting planks of what was once a hidden bridge, cleverly disguised with moss and vines. The supports are gone now, and the center sags like an old hammock. You test it with your weight. It groans, but holds. Soldiers once built hundreds of these jungle bridges, replacing them almost daily. Made from bamboo, sometimes palm logs, always tied with vine or wire, they had to be strong enough to support cargo bikes, yet fragile enough to collapse when no longer needed. Many were designed to be burned within hours of use, leaving no trail, just ash. You cross, careful not to look down. The stream bed below is dry now, filled with ferns and discarded memories. At the other end, you pause. The light is dimmer here, the silence deeper. You can smell something on the wind, gun oil maybe, or just the ghost of it. You keep walking. The trail continues. You're not sure when the mud on your boots became part of your body. It's just always there now. A second skin made of wet jungle and ground-up history. Your shoulders ache, your eyelids tug downward, but the trail ahead glows faintly amber as the late daylight starts to filter through the canopy. That color, burnt honey mixed with dust, means you're approaching something that used to matter a lot. A crossroads. Not a road junction exactly. The Ho Chi Minh Trail didn't work like a city map, but certain convergence points existed. Hidden hubs where dozens of smaller paths braided together, where people, orders, rumors, and rice all briefly met before scattering into the jungle again. You're standing in one now. The remnants are faint. Tire ruts etched into hard-packed earth, the rusted corner of a metal sign, and just barely visible in the undergrowth, the curve of a half-buried oil drum. You brush some leaves aside, and there it is, spray-painted with numbers, mostly worn off, but unmistakably Soviet. Probably fuel storage once upon a time. These junctions were the nerve centers of the trail. Some were massive, home to whole battalions at their peak. Others were skeletal, meant to disappear in a day. But all of them hummed with the quiet chaos of war in motion. One mainstream fact: by the late 1960s, the North Vietnamese had established a fully functional transport command that coordinated these hubs. It wasn't just chaos. It was a carefully timed dance of supplies, bodies, and terrain. Trucks, bicycles, human porters, all staggered through these nodes like blood through arteries. Just don't expect any street signs. You follow a side path just off the main junction, ducking past a low wall of stones. That's when you notice the metal rings embedded in the dirt, part of an anchoring system for overhead netting. This would have been a camouflage station, where incoming vehicles were covered within seconds to avoid detection by aircraft. Fringe fact: some of these junctions even had false roads, dummy tracks made by dragging weighted branches or rolling wheel molds through untouched areas to confuse aerial surveillance. The goal? Trick spy planes into bombing the wrong trees. Historians still debate how effective these decoys were. American logs show hundreds of bombings that destroyed visible infrastructure, but post-war surveys found that many of those strikes hit empty forest. Which, honestly, might have been the point. You push deeper into the brush and find what once must have been a command post. Low bunkers, mostly caved in, but one corner still stands, a triangle of bamboo and mud, reinforced with logs. Inside, there's a crumpled map, lacquered in grime and mildew, pinned to the wall with a single rusted nail. It's hand-drawn, Faded red lines mark routes. There are notes in careful, blocky Vietnamese script. Weight limits, dates, weather estimates. Someone tracked this system obsessively. You stare at it for a long time, letting the moment stretch. Then you hear it. Faint and soft. Whistling. Not the wind. A melody. Unsteady. Like someone whistling to themselves while doing chores. You spin around. Nothing. Just bamboo shifting. The undergrowth swallowing its secrets again. You exhale. Suddenly aware of your own heartbeat. It's probably just memory playing tricks. Or the forest doing its usual routine, echoing old lives back at you. A few meters past the post, you come upon something unexpectedly modern. The shell of a truck, half eaten by vines. It's a ZIL-157, Soviet-made, used widely for transporting heavy cargo. The tires are gone, the windows shattered, but the cabin is weirdly intact. You step closer. Inside, there's a deck of cards, spread out across the dashboard. The edges are swollen with moisture, the suits barely visible. But someone was playing here, waiting, killing time, maybe dealing solitaire between supply runs and bomb alerts. You sit on the step, leaning back against the cool metal. This was once a hub of tension. Radios buzzing, men arguing over fuel loads, scouts eating cold rice in silence. Now it's just a memory dump, wrapped in foliage. Another quirky tidbit, some junctions had their own news walls. Literally trees where notes were pinned for passing units, messages, warnings, jokes. One reportedly featured daily weather updates, written in charcoal by a soldier nicknamed Rain Prophet. He wasn't accurate, but he was consistent. You keep walking. The trail splinters here, thin spokes leading in multiple directions. To the untrained eye, it's chaos. But if you squint, you start to see it. A pattern. The paths form loops, not lines. Redundancy. So that if one route was bombed, another could silently pick up the flow. The Americans called this the ant trail system. Because from above, it looked like insects, endlessly zigzagging with no order. But down here, on the ground, it's clear. This was no random scurry. It was orchestrated confusion, designed to make prediction impossible. You step onto one of the side trails, almost swallowed by ferns, and find another surprise. A buried telephone cable, just visible under an exposed root. Communication lines were laid by hand, stretching hundreds of kilometers through impossible terrain. These cables carried messages from command posts in Hanoi, all the way to field units in Laos. And every meter had to be protected from weather, animals, and boredom. Legend says there was a soldier whose entire job was line walker, checking cable integrity every morning on foot, sometimes crawling through wet grass for hours, just to find a kink. Sounds like a punishment, but it was vital. If a line went dead during a supply, the sun is almost gone now. The shadows stretch like claws across the trail and the temperature drops just slightly. The junction is behind you, and once again you are alone on a trail that refuses to be forgotten. You walk on, and somewhere behind you the cards keep shuffling themselves. You keep your pace steady, not fast, never fast, but deliberate, measured. Like your feet remember something your mind has forgotten. The trail narrows here again, weaving through terrain that feels reluctant. The jungle doesn't want to make room for you. Branches hang lower, roots rise higher. Everything resists just enough to remind you who's in charge. And just when you think you've had enough of mud and mystery, the ground shifts underfoot. You're walking on planks now. Wooden boards, A-log roads, also known as floating roads or dune noi. Built over soft terrain and swamps, these paths were the engineering equivalent of a wink. Look solid, feel squishy, work just enough to get you across. Each plank was laid by hand, carried, positioned, nailed into logs crosswise to hold wheels or feet above the soup of earth below. Some sections stretched for kilometers. One infamous log road through the Sepon marshes reportedly swallowed 3 trucks in a single morning. The jungle always collects its toll. You tread carefully, the wood creaks. You imagine the rumble of a cargo convoy crossing this very stretch, trucks with headlights off, canvas covers taut, every driver praying the road holds just one more night. Mainstream historians agree these roads were critical arteries of the trail, especially in wet season, when half the mountain slopes became vertical slip and slides. Without log roads, cargo lines would stall for weeks. No supplies, no reinforcements, just mud, malaria, and disappointment. You pause where the path dips again and find yourself at the edge of what looks like a dismantled bridge. The frame is gone, but the foundation stones remain, blackened from old fire, split by time. Near one of them lies the twisted wreck of an axe head, handle long since rotted away. You pick it up, heavier than it looks, still sharp on one edge. You wonder how many trees it felled, how many planks it split, how many calloused hands gripped it before yours. Fringe fact: some log road crews worked barefoot, not by choice, but because boots wore out too quickly. They tied strips of tire rubber around their feet with wire or vine. It hurt, but it gave them grip. That, and sunglasses made of bamboo slits, to protect their eyes from sun glare during river crossings. Jungle fashion was mostly pain and practicality. You step off the log road and back into red clay. A few paces later, something white catches your eye. It's a chalk mark drawn in a tight circle on a flat stone, with a short dash beside it. A symbol, a code. The trail had thousands of these, signals etched into bark, stone, or the ground with charcoal, chalk, or even soap. A single dot might mean mine ahead, 3 lines, safe water. A triangle, watch for aircraft. The codes changed constantly. Some were invented, they went, just clearly enough that their friends understood, and cryptically enough that their enemies didn't. You crouch and mark the stone again, just to feel it. The chalk is soft, it crumbles too easily, but it carries the weight of 1,000 silent warnings. Then, movement. Not ahead, below. You freeze. Listen. A low creak. A splash. Then, silence again. You scan the underbrush and finally see it. A collapsed pulley system, now half swallowed by reeds. Rusted cables snake through tree roots, connected to what might once have been a river-crossing rig. You step closer and realize you're standing at the bank of a jungle ferry point, one of the many makeshift crossing systems that connected fragmented trails across rivers and flooded valleys. During monsoons, these crossings saved lives, and also took them. Some were rafts built from oil drums and bamboo. Others were hand-powered pulley boats that slid along fixed ropes. You look down and see one of the old anchor stones, grooved with wear. Ropes passed through these rings thousands of times, guided by soldiers whose job was simply to pull, steer, and pray no one slipped. A fringe memory recorded by a trail veteran mentions one river ferry crew that sang coded songs, melodies used to time pulley motions, disguise mechanical squeaks, and communicate without speaking. If a verse suddenly skipped or ended short, it meant, enemy spotted. You step onto the rotting deck of the ferry platform. It sags slightly, still anchored to nothing. You close your eyes and imagine the weight of a truck above it, slowly drifting through fog. The sound of pulleys groaning under strain. Back on solid ground, you follow the remnants of the cable up the opposite slope. The trail is narrower here, cut into the bank like a notch. Steep, slippery, but navigable. You claw your way up, palms scraping tree bark, and crest the rise to find, finally, a rest station. Not a military one. A real one. The jungle has surprisingly few places like this. Most of the trail was meant to be passed through, not paused in. But here you feel the weight lift slightly. You sit on one of the logs and stretch your legs. The forest exhales around you. Birds resume their conversations. You hear one frog chirp, then another. A breeze stirs the canopy. And for just a second, you are invisible again. Someone carved their initials into the log beside you. DTN-4.72. April 1972. The height of Operation Linebacker. The peak of bombing raids. And still, someone sat here and whittled their initials into wood. You don't remember exactly when the trail became steeper. The incline crept in like sleep, subtle until suddenly it's undeniable. Each step now pulls at your thighs, your breath deepens, rhythm steady, but your shirt clings like wet parchment. Still, you climb. Because here, in this particular stretch of Truong, what goes up often leads somewhere hidden. Sure enough, the earth levels off into a narrow ridge, and there it is. A listening post, crumbling, nearly invisible beneath a thicket of wild banana trees. It's small, just a trench really, dug into the slope and framed by logs. But its angle commands a view of the jungle below. From here you could watch multiple approach routes, spot dust clouds, catch glints of enemy metal. Or, if you were really patient, hear the difference between a bird call and a human cough. This, in military slang, was called an ear post. No radios, no binoculars, just raw human attention. Soldiers rotated through in shifts, sometimes lying here for 12 hours straight. They didn't speak. They didn't stretch. They just listened. Fringe tidbit? Some scouts would chew on dried tea leaves to stay alert. Bitter, energizing, and quiet. Others swore by garlic. Not eaten, rubbed behind the ears to keep insects off and supposedly sharpen hearing. Pseudoscience? Maybe. But the jungle didn't care about science. It cared about survival. You lie down for a moment in the trench, feeling the cool soil against your back. The view is blocked now by growth, but in your mind you see the scene as it once was. Jungle trembling with possibility. Every leaf suspect, every gust of wind a message. And somewhere in the murk, enemy boots that might never be seen, but always heard. Historians still debate how effective these posts were. Some argue they prevented countless ambushes. Others claim they were ceremonial, morale boosters more than tactical tools. Either way, the fact remains. Someone always had to be listening. You rise again and follow the ridge until it descends gently into a bowl-shaped valley. The path winds down and suddenly opens into a space unlike anything else on the trail, a field workshop. Scattered around the clearing are the broken remains of machine parts, gears, axles, fan blades. Half a crankshaft juts from the soil like a dinosaur fossil. A welding mask snapped in two lies face up in a patch of ivy. This was no accident. Truong had machine shops, mobile ones, tucked into the jungle, often under tents or earthen shelters, where entire truck engines could be dismantled and rebuilt with zero electricity, just hand tools, sweat, and cleverness. Mainstream fact, by 1970, at least 30 repair teams operated full-time across the trail. Their jobs were nightmarish. Engines destroyed by water, brakes seized by mud, fan belts shredded by heat and friction, and no spare parts, of course. So they made them. Filed pistons by hand, welded axles with flame torches fed by cooking oil, reinvented metallurgy on a tarp under palm leaves. You walk carefully through the clearing, find a bent truck mirror still partly reflective, a fragment of someone's view home, And nearby, a small wooden box with something inside. You pry it open slowly. It's a socket wrench, still intact, marked with a tiny stamp. CCCP. Soviet steel. Vietnamese hands. A fringe detail passed down orally. In some units, broken tools were ceremonially buried, never thrown away. Each one had served. Each one had endured. Like soldiers, they deserved rest. You pocket the wrench. It feels solid, real. The path beyond the workshop leads downhill, but not for long. It levels out into a stone-lined track, and you immediately recognize the pattern. A bomb-evading detour. These were everywhere on the trail. Curved paths built to flank predictable routes. The logic was simple. If aircraft mapped the main supply line, the trail would shift, like a living organism curling away from pain. These side paths were created overnight with picks, baskets, and stubborn willpower. Bamboo bridges popped up like mushrooms, signposts were etched into bark. It was guerrilla infrastructure at its most brilliant. Historians call this the trail of many trails. No single route, no single truth, just endless options, most of them dusty, slippery, and suspiciously quiet. You step carefully on the stone path. It crackles underfoot, but the stones are worn smooth, polished by thousands of sandals. You imagine the feet that pass before you, some hurried, some staggering, some never finishing the detour. And then you smell it. Gunpowder. Faint, old, like a firework remembered in the nose. You scan the trees. There, beneath a camphor tree, are the collapsed remnants of an old munitions cache. Wooden crates, long since splintered. You count 6. The markings are faded, but some symbols remain. Artillery shells, grenades, maybe even mortar rounds. One box is open. Inside, just dirt. They emptied these long ago, moved the weapons, or used them. But the place still feels heavy, like a cupboard that once held something dangerous. You sit on the edge of the crate and close your eyes. Mainstream detail. Many munitions dumps were built deep underground, protected by layers of clay and palm fronds, with entry tunnels disguised as animal dens or termite mounds. Some were so well hidden that they weren't discovered until decades after the war ended. Fringe tidbit: there's at least one recorded incident of a farmer in the 1990s unearthing a live Soviet mortar round while planting cassava. He turned it into a wind chime. No comment on whether it ever chimed. You stand again, brushing the dirt from your pants. The light is fading now, less orange, more violet. That hour between visibility and dream. You walk on. The trail narrows once more, thinner, quieter. It's like the jungle is pulling itself inward again. But you feel it in your spine. You're getting close to something big. Not louder, just deeper. The kind of place the trail remembers. A final gust of wind passes through the trees. It smells of smoke and rain. You walk toward it, because on this path, everything leaves a trace. The forest hushes, as if holding its breath. The path before you feels unnaturally dense, not only with vines and undergrowth, but with memory. Every leaf seems older, every vine a thread tugged from something knotted deep underground. This is no ordinary trail. You are stepping into what the old guides once whispered about: the hidden turn. It appears on no map, of course, but it lives in stories, handed down from one trail walker to the next. A stretch of jungle where time pools and warps, where the air itself feels thick with hushed secrets. And then you see them. Moss-choked wooden posts, weathered and leaning. A rubber-coated cable slung between them, brittle now. Long ago, a single snapped line here meant days of silence. Or worse, discovery. You step over the cable with care. The forest floor dips beneath your feet, and you come upon a curious structure. Sunken, circular, roughly 5 meters across, lined with stone. An old storage pit, perhaps once used to stash rations or supplies during the monsoons. Inside, the pit yawns open. You spot a child's rubber sandal, shrunk, cracked, left behind for decades. Historians still debate the exact age of these artifacts, but to you, it feels timeless. The path dips again, guiding you toward a collapsed outpost, or a fragment of something much older, part natural, part man-made. You pass a rusted bell, its clapper frozen in place, and the forest darkens around you. Here, the trees are different. Ancient, charred, their bark scarred. Others are tightly bandaged by thick vines. You begin to notice openings at the base of the slope, too narrow for a person, too shallow for a trap. Then it dawns on you. These are air vents. You've reached the outskirts of a bunker network, one of those semi-permanent logistics hubs tunneled into hillsides, used to coordinate the flow of men and material over long stretches of time. Stepping inside, you enter a small, damp chamber with a single work table. On the table lies a faded tat, or perhaps a map, pinned to the cracked concrete wall. Supply rosters, rainfall measurements, tallies scrawled in fading ink. Many pages are smudged beyond recognition, but one remains oddly intact. You smile, quietly. You're alone, but not truly alone. A sense of human presence lingers here. Humor and resilience were lifelines on this trail, after all. Here's a fringe detail. Scattered in post-war archives are cartoon sketches made by soldiers and porters. Light-hearted trail cartoons, drawn to boost morale, hidden in the margins of official reports. You step back outside. The air feels cooler now. The forest, it seems, breathes again, as if offering you a moment to rest. You descend the ridge in silence now. The jungle is quieter here, fewer birds, less insect chatter, as if nature itself is reluctant to speak of what lies ahead. The trail narrows between two sheer outcrops of black stone, forcing you into single file even though you walk alone. This is the bottleneck, a natural corridor known in faded field reports as the throat. And once you pass through, the air shifts, the trees part slightly. The humidity deepens, not from heat, but from memory. You're standing at the edge of one of the most dangerous stretches of the entire Ho Chi Minh Trail. A segment so exposed, so frequently bombed, the soldiers used to call it the anvil. And now, looking across the open swath of forest, you understand why. There's no canopy here, just a wide, raw gash through the trees. Charred trunks, scorched earth, and jagged crater pits still visible even under layers of moss. This wasn't cleared by hand. It was carved from the sky. Mainstream fact. This area marks one of the first times American B-52s used carpet bombing tactics directly on the trail system, dropping hundreds of tons of explosives over suspected supply corridors. The goal was annihilation. Obliterate the forest, the road, the bunkers, the people. Turn trail into gravel. But of course the jungle had other ideas. Fringe tidbit? In the weeks following the first strikes here, Vietnamese trail workers reportedly created ghost paths through the craters, zigzagging between bomb holes to create illusionary roadways. Some even laid broken planks in patterns that mimicked tire ruts, so that future bombers would return to strike. Nothing. Historians still argue whether those tricks ever worked. But what's undeniable is this. The trail didn't stop. It just moved, shifted, hid deeper, grew more stubborn with every explosion. You pick your way through the crater field now, watching your step. Some pits are shallow, filled with leaves, others plunge deep, their bottoms lost in shadow. You pause at one particularly wide hole and spot something rusted at its center, a twisted axle, all that remains of a truck that didn't make it. Around the rim, you notice small wooden stakes. Someone tried to fill this crater once, half-heartedly maybe, or out of desperation. There are shovel marks still visible in the clay. One side is partly packed down with what appears to be smashed rice husks, used in trail repair during shortages of gravel. A few meters further on, you find a patch of melted metal embedded in a tree. It's smooth to the touch, but your fingertips come away faintly blackened. This was once part of a radio tower, likely mobile, likely targeted. Now it's just sculpture, burnt testimony. You sit for a moment on the edge of a low crater and notice a strange silence in your ears. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of birdsong, which is different. It means this part of the jungle still holds on to the violence of its past. Even the animals remember. And then, a whisper on the breeze, singing, very faint, very high. A single voice. You scan the clearing, but of course there's no one there. Just the trees, the craters, and the wind. You recognize the melody, though. It's one that trail porters used to hum under their breath during long night marches. No words, just a tune. The song is called Dingoy Nuirung, the voice of the mountains and forest. It wasn't for comfort. It was for rhythm. If you kept the pace of the melody, you wouldn't trip, wouldn't fall behind, wouldn't freeze in fear when the next bomb dropped. You hum a few bars yourself out of instinct. The air shivers in response. At the far end of the clearing, just before the trail bends again, you spot a small stone marker. Not official, just 2 rocks stacked carefully, with a third smaller one placed on top. You approach and see something scratched into the surface. A name. Faded. Barely there. But you think it says Lin. No rank, no date, just a name. Someone marking that they were here, that they existed, that they walked the anvil and lived long enough to leave a stone behind. Fringe detail. Some soldiers believed leaving a stone with your name helped the jungle remember you. Others thought it helped the next traveler know you'd made it, that you'd gone ahead to clear the path. You decide not to disturb it. The trail continues beyond the anvil, rising again slightly. More green returns to the trees. The air grows less heavy, but your legs carry the weight of that crater field. You feel it in your knees, your shoulders, your breath. You're nearing the end now. Not of the trail exactly. Truong's sun goes on far beyond this stretch, but of this journey, this chain of moments, this buried artery of war and resilience. But there's one more place the jungle wants to show you. Just ahead, half covered in vines, lies the remnant of a makeshift chapel. No more than a bamboo frame and a scorched wooden altar. Atop it rests a weather-stained notebook, open to a final penciled line. Chung toi di, de kak ban duk nu. We walk, so you may sleep. You sit beside it, not to pray, but to listen. Because down here, under this soft soil and heavy sky, there are still footsteps echoing. And tonight, they've let you hear them. The trail narrows one final time, threading its way beneath low branches and the arching reach of ancient trees. You step carefully now, not out of caution, but reverence. This stretch feels sacred, not in a religious sense, but in the way certain places hold. There's no sign, no marker, but the path opens into a wide, mossy clearing, and you just know this is where the trail told its final secret. At the far end of the glade, beneath a canopy of vines, lies the remains of a trail headquarters. Mainstream fact. Many sections of the Ho Chi Minh Trail were run, like Independent Mint, Emer, Triage, and dormitories for children displaced by the road Maubis. Fringe fact. Some of these bunkers contained Fluxiaries blocks. Support there. You duck under a fallen branch and step inside the remains of the bunker. It smells like earth. There's a desk, or what's left of one. Its bamboo legs are half eaten by termites, but the surface still holds a few artifacts, the meek, a potential, and a piece of yellowed cloth with a stenciled insignia, 2 crossed machetes. You let your hand rest on the cloth. Somewhere in this same space, a decision was made. One that might have altered a battle, saved a convoy, cost a life. The walls are silent now, but once they absorbed everything: fear, debate, discipline, grief. Then, at the corner of the bunker, you spot something even more unexpected. A camera tripod. Bent, cracked, left behind like an afterthought. Historians still debate just how much was photographed on the trail. Official propaganda images exist, of course. Smiling soldiers, victory poses, heroic porters hauling bags. But countless unofficial photos were also taken. Secret rolls of film, unfinished reels, snapshots never developed. Some say they were kept for post-war memoirs. Others believe they were never meant to be seen. Just small captures of life in a world too vast for memory alone. You move to the far end of the bunker, where a shallow alcove has collapsed into itself. But lodged in the soil is something familiar, a trowel, still whole, still usable. You pick it up and turn it over in your hands. It's scratched but sturdy, a trail digger's tool. With it, someone carved drainage ditches, shaped cooking pits, maybe even buried a fallen comrade, or a bundle of letters, or a dream they couldn't carry anymore. You step outside again. The clearing has shifted with the light. It's dusk now, the blue hour, where color softens, and even the wind seems to hesitate. In the center of the clearing, almost hidden by ivy, lies a wheelbarrow frame, flipped on its side, one of the old steel-rimmed ones, too heavy for most use, but still prized when it was available. You run your fingers along its rusted curve. There's a name carved into the side. Bin. Not the same as Lynn's, but this one's different. On its strap is etched a tiny star, faded red. You pick it up gently. It's a child's. Maybe 10, maybe 12. And suddenly you remember the sandal back in the storage crater. Different shoe, same size, same silence. This war walked on the backs of men and women, but it also walked on small feet, carrying rice, water, sometimes bullets, sometimes news. The trail did not spare youth. It made them older, one step at a time. You return the sandal to where you found it, nestled beside the wheelbarrow, beneath a curtain of leaves. And finally, with the clearing behind you, you step back onto the path. The final stretch winds gently downhill. The trees are thinner now. The underbrush gives way to tall grasses. You pass through the last arch of bamboo, and just beyond it lies the edge of a river. You hear it before you see it. Soft and wide, lapping against stone banks. This was once a ferry point, now just a lazy crossing of forgetfulness. Across the water, the trail picks up again, worn, faithful, waiting. But you don't cross. You stand there, on the shore, and listen. You've walked long enough. The trail, for now, lets you rest. Wind down. 300 words. The river drifts quietly now, slow and forgiving. The light is gone, replaced by that soft indigo blur that only twilight brings. You settle onto a smooth rock, still warm from the day's sun, and feel your body finally let go. Muscles loosening, breath deepening, thoughts slowing to a gentle crawl. All around you, the forest exhales. The trees creak not with threat, but with age. The insects sing, not with alarm, but with rhythm. Even the air feels softer here, as if it, too, remembers every name once whispered beneath these branches. And so, you let it all settle. The sounds, the stories, the steps you've retraced along this hidden artery of war. A war that didn't rage like thunder, but crept like roots. Quiet, patient, human. In the stillness, you realize something simple. This was never just a trail. It was a lifeline, a secret thread binding north to south, hope to despair, resistance to resilience. It was carved by machetes, carried by bare hands, and remembered now by you. You let your eyes close, just for a moment. The river keeps murmuring. The jungle wraps itself around you like a lullaby. And somewhere, back on the trail, the sandals rest.